A lot has happened. There was the Iran, what many are saying is a symbolic attack on the U.S. airbase in Qatar. But over the last 24 hours, we saw Israeli media leaking out saying that they were seeking an end to the conflict after the U.S. airbase attack by Iran. We had an announcement of a ceasefire by Donald Trump. We had a massive missile attack on Beersheba and Tel Aviv in many surrounding areas. The scores of Israelis killed. I believe there was 11 or 13. There's conflicting reports in one missile strike alone overnight. And now the ceasefire appears to be in effect. Or please correct the record, Professor Marandi. What has been going on and how do you see this?
Well, you're right. The Israeli regime was seeking a ceasefire even before Trump carried out his own aggression and his own act of war against Iran. The Israeli regime began this unprovoked war with a blitzkrieg attack in the foolish belief that they could undermine Iran, defeat Iran. And although they scored some successes in the first hour, obviously, when you carry out an act of aggression that's unprovoked, you will have successes. They murdered a lot of innocent people. They murdered senior officials and their families and their neighbors, which of course is not important for the West or the Israeli regime, as we've seen in Gaza and Lebanon. But they failed. The Iranians regrouped. They started hammering Israeli cities. They started firing drones and missiles. And till the very end, the Iranians were firing lots of drones and lots of missiles, especially during the last 2-3 hours. And it's not a ceasefire agreement. The Iranians have said that we are halting fire, and if the Israeli regime makes any move, we will restart the conflict. So I don't know exactly what sort of technical term that would have, but the Iranians have warned the Israeli regime that if it fires at Iran, if it shoots at Iran, they'll be hit back very hard. But I think it's a failure for the regime. The United States and the Israelis have not destroyed Iran's nuclear program. Iran has many scientists. A lot of its assets are intact. We'll have to see what really happened in Fordo. And Iran has been provided an excuse not to cooperate with the IAEA like before anymore. And but most importantly, I think this shows the vulnerability of the Israeli regime. For the first time ever, they've been hammered and hammered and hammered unrelentlessly, and Netanyahu was seeking a way out. The Iranians, of course, don't want a regional war. They don't want a global economic collapse, but they wanted to humiliate the regime and humiliate Netanyahu. And I think that's exactly what happened.
Perhaps you can talk about the timing of this, because as of now, what Israel is saying, Israel Katz, the defense minister of Israel, is saying that Israel will strike. And now even Donald Trump is saying Israel don't strike. But at the same time, of course, there really is no ceasefire when it comes to Israel. That word seems anathema to their vocabulary with what we've seen in Gaza and Lebanon already. But talk about the timing of this. Why now? Why is it that Iran and Israel, or at least Israel and Donald Trump, are coming to this conclusion that a ceasefire is necessary?
Well, Iran doesn't want to unnecessarily prolong a war and have civilians killed, because after all, this regime is murderous. And it just last night, it was just randomly bombing places in Tehran. They bombed a hospital that I would guess from where I am right now is a 1 hour walk, less than an hour probably, just a walk, an ordinary walk. You get there. It's in it's a street that if you go, it's actually pretty straight from here, pretty straight. So they bomb hospitals. They bombed in a town in the north of Iran, a small city. They slaughtered 2 entire families and brought down the building. That's how the regime is. So Iran doesn't want to just continue the war for the sake of it. They humiliated the regime. The regime wanted a ceasefire. Iran got what it wanted. It humiliated Netanyahu. It severely weakened him, and it weakened the regime, because this is the first time that you see Israeli society fall apart, and that they cannot, they cannot just bomb like they do in Gaza, or even in 2006 when they lost the war against Hezbollah. Ordinary Israelis were doing more or less their own thing, and the fighting was being carried out in Lebanon. This is the first time that the war has been seriously brought to occupied Palestine, throughout occupied Palestine, with heavy missiles, much heavier than the sort of missiles that the Israelis have been firing at Iran. These are long range missiles with huge payloads. So Iran humiliated the regime. It also has been provided an excellent excuse to change the nature of its relationship with the International Atomic Energy Agency. That will be very useful in the future, because the agency has shown itself to be dishonest. It has shown it during this period. It has refused to condemn the United States or the Israeli regime for striking nuclear sites, and for bringing about the threat of radiation leaking and harming huge uh, numbers of people. They are indifferent. The Europeans are indifferent. They supported it. So because of this, Iran now has new leverage. They can do things with their nuclear program without uh, without having the International Atomic Energy Agency pleased about it. They will give them very limited information. So now Iran has good reason not to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency, not to provide it with the sort of information that it's seeking. There's even a discussion to leave the NPT altogether, which is very serious. So this gives Iran huge leverage. In future, Iran is not going to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to have information about its scientists or about its assets, so that it can leak it to the Israelis for assassination and for airstrikes, or to the Americans for airstrikes. It's going to be a very different relationship. So in the long term, I think that the United States and the Israeli regime is calculated on that front as well. But most importantly, the regime has shown itself to the world as aggressive, as barbaric, as a threat to humanity by targeting peaceful nuclear sites, and that it has failed. The myth of Israeli invincibility is gone. It's forever gone. Despite the fact that the Americans and the Europeans were right behind it, and the Americans were doing the heavy lifting to block Iranian missiles and drones, they failed. And at the end, it was the Iranians that were hitting the Israelis left and right until the very last minute of fighting.
Your reaction to what Israel is, of course, really up in arms about, the establishment of the ceasefire, the application of it. Iran fired a massive missile attack, and it caused incredible amounts of damage. The images are absolutely stunning, but also some of the highest casualty rates from these strikes. What kind of message was Iran sending as this supposed ceasefire? I call it supposed because I don't have much faith in the Israeli side of keeping it, but the supposed ceasefire. What's your reaction to Iran's up to the minute response before it came into effect?
It's clear the Iranians are sending a message to the Israelis and to the West that we're in a position of strength, that we can hit at will whenever we want, wherever we want, and that until the very last moment, Iran hit them to show that it's the Israeli regime that's in a position of weakness. And if the Israeli regime continues with this, Iran will continue, and it will hammer the Israeli regime day and night. And remember, it's a small entity. Iran, by firing a few missiles here and there, they affect the whole country is devastated. The whole country is in fear. The whole regime is in fear of Iranian missiles. And again, the payload is huge. So when the Israeli regime bombs Tehran with bombs or with their missiles, it causes damage. But Tehran is huge. and the payload of these missiles is much smaller. But Tel Aviv is much smaller than Tehran, and the missiles that Iran fires there are enormous. So people across the Israel are traumatized, and we see people leaving. We see people begging for a ceasefire. We see politicians seeking a ceasefire, and ultimately Netanyahu was seeking a ceasefire. We didn't seek a ceasefire. It was Netanyahu for the last few days was pushing for an end to the military conflict. That shows that itself, I think, shows more than enough.
What do you say to those? I see it on social media. I see those, especially even people who support what Iran's right to self-defense here. That Iran didn't get anything here. That many people I've seen react were disappointed that a ceasefire was established, given that there has been no terms set that appear favorable not only to Iran but Gaza and the rest of the region. What do you say to people who are disappointed right now that Iran is going to stop, and they claim apparently that Iran has not secured anything for themselves or for those that they've said that they are standing with, the Palestinian people in particular?
Well, I think all of this has been for the Palestinian people from day one. All of Iran's sanctions, all of the strikes against Iran is because of the Palestinian people. Who else but Iran and Yemen has done anything for the Palestinians? Who has even broken off ties with the Israeli regime? Who has stopped trade with the Israeli regime? Who has stopped sending or transporting oil to the Israeli regime? It's only Iran. It's Iran standing up against the entire West and regional collaborators. I think the sacrifices that Iran has made are and continues to make are enormous. But Iran broke the back of Netanyahu. Netanyahu got nothing. Has the Iranian nuclear program really been destroyed? Of course not. Has Netanyahu been able to undermine the Islamic Republic of Iran? Of course not. Has the Israeli regime, despite this blitzkrieg attack, been able to claim that it has won militarily? Of course not. So it's a failure on all fronts. But of course, Iran has other calculations too. If if there's if Iran can end the war with success, uh, and also have countries across the global south that are very fearful of the oil and gas trade coming to an end, if it can have them pleased with Iran, if it can have them side with Iran, BRICS countries, they're all very concerned about the situation. And they look down upon the Israeli regime. They look at the Israeli regime with disgust. But if there's a global economic crisis, then countries' calculations could possibly change. So Iran has to carry out war in a way in which the other side is seen as the aggressor. Iran is always seen as the reasonable actor. And in the long run, that benefits Gaza, that benefits Lebanon, that benefits Yemen, and that benefits Iran.
There was some confusion on social media. You had Foreign Minister Abbas Arachi apparently saying that there was no ceasefire coming into effect, that they hadn't even received any terms of it, and then announcing not too long later that it would come into effect. What do you make of how this was all handled politically? Some people are having issues with this on the Iran side. I'm curious on what you believe is most important here as we come into this next phase of what I believe is a conflict and, of course, a regional situation that is far from resolved.
Yes, there was some confusion, and I'm not sure exactly what was meant by 4 a.m. And there was no ceasefire in the sense that there was a ceasefire agreement, and that the two sides have some. There's only a cessation of hostilities. In other words, there's no shooting. But if the Israeli regime does anything, Iran will fire back immediately. And the Iranians have already said that they violated the ceasefire on 3 occasions. So there's not an agreement where, uh, right now it's just the two sides stop shooting. And no one can be sure about what's going to happen tomorrow. And the Israeli regime has already made new threats. And Iran said, if you fire at us, we will hit you back very hard. So we have to see now what happens inside Israel, because Netanyahu is definitely in trouble. He did not get what he wants. Iran has its scientists, it has its nuclear program, it has its military, and it has its missile defense that was hitting the Israelis hard till the very, very end. So we'll have to wait and see. Israel is not a regime that sits quiet and behaves like a country. It's an expansionist, murderous, racist regime. And Iran is, as we speak, preparing itself for potential future conflict. Have no doubt that Iran is going to be very swift in dealing with its deficiencies, in defensive deficiencies, and strengthening its offensive capabilities.
Talk about what some are concerned about too is Israel was on as you said, it was on the defensive. It was running out of air defense systems. We've seen this in Ukraine, where Ukraine has begged for a ceasefire. The U.S. has begged for a ceasefire in apparent desire to rearm Ukraine so that it can continue on with the conflict. Do you see a similar dynamic taking place here? You said Iran will be preparing, but at the same time, Israel was, as you said, in a very dire situation militarily. It was not going to last very long in terms of its air defense systems. Do you see this as a moment for Israel to regroup? And how much should we be concerned about this?
Well, yes, of course, they'll try to regroup, but also remember in their blitzkrieg attack, they did a lot of damage to Iran's air defenses. And so Iran is going to have to seriously rebuild its air defenses and strengthen them much further than before and very rapidly with new technology and new capabilities. So it's not just the Israelis that are going to be looking to prepare themselves. Iran is going to be preparing itself. The only difference is that the Israeli regime lost this round. I'm not saying that Iran knocked out the regime, but the regime was seeking a ceasefire. The regime has problems at home, and Iran wants to see what sort of dynamics are at play now inside Palestine, occupied Palestine, after the failure of Netanyahu. Let's see what happens within Israeli society or the community of Zionists that occupy Palestine.
There's a lot of moving pieces here, Professor Marandi. We are going to have to follow these developments because, as you said, Israel is in a very unstable situation. And generally, how Israel has been dealing with its instability and its fragility, and of course, its loss of legitimacy, is by more war, more violence, of course, and more genocide against the Palestinian people.
No, I just want to remind everyone that Iranians have made huge sacrifices for Palestine. And if you look over the years for 4.5 decades, no country has made these sacrifices. I mean, Yemen has made huge sacrifices, but it has been added to the axis of resistance for the last 10 years after the coming to power of Ansarullah and its allies. And I think that today's defeat of Netanyahu is, in the long run, very good news. I think the divisions inside the Israeli regime will be intensified. Obviously, the regime is still in place and it still has the full support of the West. But this was a huge, huge slap in the face. We would like to see Iran hit much harder. We would like to see the Israeli regime incapable of hitting back. But there are many calculations. And I think it's fair to say that Netanyahu's failure is a victory for the entire axis of resistance.